pride of achievement.
I have worked hard, and I now consider myself a very successful man. I would be a hypocrite if I did not admit that I have a considerable amount of satisfaction and, yes, a certain amount of pride too in my achievement. Would that be wrong?
One evening, a foreign visitor addressed Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj with these words. He was in his 40s, smug, self-confident, and a bit aggressive. The conversation then proceeded along the following lines. Maharaj, before we consider what is right and what is wrong, please tell me who is asking this question.
Visitor, a bit startled. Why, me, of course.
And who is that?
Mr. This Me, who is sitting in front of you.
And you think that that is you?
You see me, I see myself. Where is the doubt?
You mean this object that is before me? What is your earliest recollection of this object that you think you are? Think as far back as you can.
After a minute or two, the earliest recollection would perhaps be of being caressed and cuddled by my mother.
You mean as a tiny infant? Would you say that the successful man of today is the same helpless infant? Or is it someone else?
It is undoubtedly the same.
Good. Now, if you think further back, would you say that this infant, which you can recollect, is the same baby that was born to your mother? That same baby that was once too helpless, even to realize what was happening, when its little body was going through its natural physical functions and could only cry when it was hungry or in pain?
Yes, I was that baby.
And before the baby acquired its body and was delivered, what were you?
I don't understand.
You do understand. Think. What happened in your mother's womb? What was developing into a body with bones, blood, marrow, muscles, etc., over a period of 9 months? Was it not a male sperm cell that combined with an ovum in the female womb, thus beginning a new life and, in the process, going through numerous hazards? Who guarded this new life during this period of hazards? Is it not that very infinitesimally tiny sperm cell which is now so proud of his achievements? And who asked particularly for you? Your mother? Your father? Did they particularly want you for a son? Did you have anything to do with being born to these particular parents?
I'm afraid I really haven't thought along these lines.
Exactly. Do think along these lines. Then perhaps you will have some idea of your true identity. Thereafter, consider if you could possibly be proud of what you have achieved.
I think I begin to understand what you're driving at.
If you go deeper into the matter, you will realize that the source of the body, the male sperm and the female ovum, is in itself the essence of food consumed by the parents. That the physical form is made of and fed by the 5 elements constituting the food, and that, quite often, the body of one creature does become the food for another creature.
But surely I, as such, must be something other than this food body.
Indeed you are, but not some thing. Find out what it is that gives sentience to a sentient being, that without which you would not even know that you exist, let alone the world outside. And finally, go deeper yet and examine if this beingness, this consciousness itself, is not time-bound.
I shall certainly go into the various questions you have raised, although I must confess that I have never explored these areas before, and I feel almost giddy in my ignorance of the new spheres you have opened up before me. I will come and see you again, sir.
You are always welcome. Consciousness, the only capital. Maharaj often comes out with the statement that consciousness is the only capital that a sentient being is born with. This, he says, is the apparent position. The real situation, however, is that what is born is consciousness, which needs an organism to manifest itself in, and that organism is the physical body. What is it that gives sentience? capacity to feel sensations, to respond to stimuli, to a sentient being. What is it that distinguishes a person who is alive from the one who is dead? It is, of course, the sense of being, the knowledge of being present, consciousness, the activizing spirit which animates the physical construct of the body. It is consciousness indeed that manifests itself in individual forms and gives them apparent existence. In human beings, through such manifestation, arises the concept of a separate I. In each individual, the Absolute gets reflected as awareness, and thus pure awareness becomes self-awareness, or consciousness. The objective universe is in continuous flux, constantly projecting and dissolving innumerable forms. Whenever a form is created and is infused with life, prana, consciousness appears simultaneously and automatically by the reflection of the absolute awareness in matter. Consciousness, it must be clearly understood, is a reflection of the absolute against the surface of matter, bringing a sense of duality. As different from it, pure awareness, the absolute state, is without beginning and end, without the need of any support other than itself. Awareness becomes consciousness only when it has an object to reflect against. Between pure awareness and awareness reflected as consciousness, says Maharaj, there is a gap which the mind cannot cross. Reflection of the sun in a drop of dew is not the sun. Manifested consciousness is time-bound inasmuch as it disappears as soon as the physical construct it inhabits comes to an end. Nevertheless, according to Maharaj, it is the only capital a sentient being is born with. And manifested consciousness being his only connection with the Absolute, it becomes the only instrument by which the sentient being can hope to get an illusory liberation from the individual he believes himself to be. By being one with his consciousness and treating it as his God, he can hope to attain what he thinks as the unattainable. What is the actual substance of this animating consciousness? Obviously, it must be physical material because, in the absence of the physical form, it cannot survive. Manifested consciousness can exist only as long as its abode, the body, is kept in a sound and habitable condition. Although consciousness is a reflection of the Absolute, it is time-bound and can be sustained only by the food material comprising the 5 elements that the physical body is. Consciousness resides in a healthy body and abandons it when it is decayed and moribund. Reflection of the sun can be seen only in a clear dewdrop, not in a muddy one. Maharaj often says that we can observe the nature and function of consciousness in our daily routine of sleeping, dreaming, and waking states. In deep sleep, consciousness retires into a state of repose, as it were. When consciousness is absent, there is no sense of one's existence or presence, let alone the existence of the world and its inhabitants, or of any ideas of bondage and liberation. This is so because the very concept of I is absent. In the dream state, a speck of consciousness begins to stir. One is not yet fully awake. And then, in a split second, in that speck of consciousness is created an entire world of mountains and valleys, rivers and lakes, cities and villages with buildings and people of various ages, including the dreamer himself. And, what is more important, the dreamer has no control over what the dreamed figures are doing. In other words, a new living world is created in a split second, fabricated out of memory and imagination merely by a single movement in that speck of consciousness. Imagine, therefore, says Maharaj, the extraordinary power of this consciousness, a mere speck of which can contain and project an entire universe. When the dreamer wakes up, the dream world and the dreamed figures disappear. What happens when the deep sleep, as also the dream state, are over and consciousness appears again? The immediate sense, then, is that of existence and presence, not the presence of me, but presence as such. Soon, however, the mind takes over and creates the I concept and awareness of the body. Maharaj tells us repeatedly that we are so accustomed to thinking of ourselves as bodies having consciousness that we find it very difficult to accept or even understand the real position. Actually, it is consciousness which manifests itself in innumerable bodies. It is therefore essential to apperceive that birth and death are nothing but the beginning and the ending of a stream of movements in consciousness, interpreted as events in space-time. If we can realize this, we shall also realize that we are pure being, awareness bliss in our original pristine state, and when in touch with consciousness, we are only the witnessing of, and totally apart from, the various movements in consciousness. This is an indisputable fact, because obviously we cannot be what we perceive. The perceiver must be different from what he perceives, in face of death.
Visitor: My only son died a few days ago in a car accident, and I find it almost impossible to accept his death with philosophical fortitude. I know that I am not the first person to suffer such bereavement. I also know that each one of us has to die sometime. I have, in my mind, sought solace from all the usual ploys by which one consoles oneself and others in such predicaments. And yet, I come back to the tragic fact that a cruel fate should deprive my son of everything in the prime of his life. Why? Why? I keep on asking myself. Sir, I cannot get over my grief.
Maharaj, after sitting for a minute or so with his eyes closed, it is unavailing and futile to say that I am grieved because, in the absence of me as an individual, there are no others, and I see myself mirrored in all of you. Obviously, you have not come to me for mere sympathy, which you surely must have received in abundance from your relatives and friends. Remember, one goes through life, year after year, enjoying the usual pleasures and suffering the usual pains, but never once seeing life in its true perspective. And what is the true perspective? It is this: there are no others, nor will there ever be any such entities. Every man should understand this, and have the courage to live his life with this understanding. Do you have this courage, my friend? Or must you wallow in what you call your grief?
Visitor: Maharaj, pardon me. I do not fully understand what you have said, but I do feel startled and shaken. You have exposed the core of my being, and what you have said so pithily appears to be the golden key to life. Please elaborate on what you have just said. What exactly is it that I must do?
Maharaj, do? Absolutely nothing. Just see the transient as transient, the unreal as unreal, the false as false, and you will realize your true nature. You have mentioned your grief. Have you ever looked at grief in the face and tried to understand what it really is? To lose somebody or something you have loved dearly is bound to cause sorrow. And since death is total annihilation with absolute finality, the sorrow caused by it is unmitigated. But even this overwhelming sorrow cannot last long if you intellectually analyze it. What exactly are you grieving for? Go back to the beginning. Did you and your wife make any agreement with someone that you would have a son, a particular body, and that he would have a particular destiny? Is it not a fact that his conception itself was a chance? That the fetus survived the many hazards in the womb was another matter of chance? That the baby was a boy was yet another chance? In other words, what you called your son was just a chance event, a happening over which you have had no control at all at any time, and now that event has come to an end. What exactly are you grieving for? Are you grieving for the few pleasant experiences and the many painful experiences that your son has missed in the years to come? Or are you really grieving for the pleasures and conveniences that you will no longer be able to receive from him. Mind you, all this is from the point of view of the false. Nonetheless, are you with me so far?
Visitor, I'm afraid I continue to remain stunned. I certainly follow what you have just said. Only, what did you mean when you said that all this was on the level of the false?
Maharaj. Now we shall come to the truth. Please understand, as truth, that you are not an individual, a person. The person that one thinks one is only a product of imagination, and the self is the victim of this illusion. The person cannot exist in its own right. It is the self, consciousness, that mistakenly believes there is a person and is conscious of being it. Change your viewpoint. Don't look at the world as something outside of yourself. See the person you imagine yourself to be as a part of the world, really a dream world, which you perceive as an appearance in your consciousness, and look at the whole show from the outside. Remember, you are not the mind, which is nothing but the content of consciousness. As long as you identify yourself with the body-mind, you are vulnerable to sorrow and suffering. In the truth, there is just being, not being father or son, this or that. You are beyond time and space, in contact with them only at the point of now and here, but otherwise timeless, spaceless, and invulnerable to any experience. Understand this and grieve no more. Once you realize that there is nothing in this world that you can or need call your own, you will look at it from the outside, as you look at a play on the stage or a movie on the screen, admiring and enjoying, perhaps suffering, but deep down, quite unmoved. Manifest and the unmanifest are one. Is an ever-present entity appearing at different levels, manifest and unmanifest? This question is often posed before Maharaj in various ways, in different words, by different persons, the essence of the question being the same. Sometimes the bolder visitor might bring up the question right at the start of a session, if Maharaj should happen to mention, which he often does, that his listeners must always bear in mind that he is talking not as an individual to another individual, but as consciousness to consciousness about the nature of consciousness. According to Maharaj, at the level of the mind, the self may be considered under three aspects: the impersonal, avyakta, unmanifest; the absolute, beyond all sensory perception or experience and unaware of itself; the superpersonal, vyakta, manifested, which is the reflection of the absolute in consciousness, as I am; the personal, vyakti, which is a construct of the physical and vital processes, the psychosomatic apparatus in which consciousness manifests itself. Maharaj, however, makes it a point to repeat at frequent intervals that such distinction is purely a notional one and cannot exist in reality. Essentially, there is no difference between the manifest, vyakta, and the unmanifest, avyakta, just as there is no difference essentially between light and daylight. The universe is full of light, but that light cannot be seen until it is reflected against a surface as daylight. And what the daylight reveals is the individual person, vyakti. The individual in the form of the human body is always the object. Consciousness, as the witnessing, is the subject, and their relation of mutual dependence. Consciousness cannot appear without the apparatus of a body, and the body cannot have sentience without consciousness, is the proof of their basic identity with the Absolute. They both are the same consciousness, one at rest, the other in movement, each conscious of the other. The entire manifested universe, explains Maharaj, exists only in consciousness. The conceptualized process would be as follows. Consciousness arises in pure being, for no particular cause or reason other than that it is its nature to do so, like waves on the surface of the sea. In consciousness, the world appears and disappears, and each one of us is entitled to say, "All there is I. All there is mine. Before all beginnings, after all endings, I am there to witness whatever happens." Me and you are only appearances in consciousness. All are basically I. It is not that the world does not exist. As an appearance in consciousness, the world is the totality of the known in the potential of the unknown. The world can be said to appear, but not to be. The duration of the appearances, of course, will differ according to the different scales of time. Apart from the fact that the world disappears in deep sleep and reappears in the waking state, the duration of its appearance would vary according to the allotted span of one's lifetime. A few hours for an insect, and aeons for the trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwara. Ultimately, however, whatever is an appearance in consciousness must end, and it cannot have any reality. The manner in which Maharaj expounds this sublime knowledge is truly astonishing in its range of aspects, while the central theme continues to remain firmly anchored. He says that awareness comes from the Absolute, Avyakta, and pervades the inner self, Vyakta. The outer self, Vyakti, is that part of one's being of which one is not aware, inasmuch as, although one may be conscious, for every sentient being has consciousness, it is possible for one not to be aware. In other words, the outer self, Vyakti, is delineated by the physical body, the inner self, Vyakta, by consciousness, and it is only in pure awareness that the Supreme, Avyakta, can be contacted. There can never be any experience as such of the Absolute, for the simple reason that there cannot possibly be anything objective about the Absolute, which is essentially pure subjectivity. It is the inner self-consciousness that is the experiencing medium for all experience. The Absolute provides the potentiality for the experience. The self provides the actuality. The individual person's contact with awareness of the Absolute can come only when the mind is fasting, as it were, because then the process of conceptualizing ceases. When the mind is quiet, it reflects reality. When the mind is absolutely motionless, it dissolves, and only reality remains. That is why, says Maharaj again and again, it is necessary to be one with consciousness. When the mind feasts, reality disappears. When the mind fasts, reality enters. Awareness, Maharaj points out in yet another way, when it is in contact with an object, a physical form, becomes witnessing. When at the same time there is self-identification with the object, such a state becomes the person. In reality, there is only one state. When corrupted and tainted by self-identification, it may be called a person, Vyakti. When it is tinted by a sense of being, the resulting consciousness becomes the witnessing. When it remains in its pristine purity, untainted and untinted, it is the Supreme, the Absolute. It is necessary to be clear about the difference, notional though it be, between awareness of the Absolute and the consciousness in which the universe appears. Maharaj repeatedly warns us, one is only the reflection of the other. But the reflection of the sun in the dewdrop is not the sun. In the absence of objectivization, as in deep sleep, the apparent universe is not, but we are. This is so because what we are is what the apparent universe is, and vice versa. Dual in presence, non-dual in absence, irreconcilably separate in concept, inviolably united when unconceived. Awareness and consciousness. The outstanding feature of Maharaj's talks with visitors is the pervading sense of their total spontaneity. Subjects are never selected earlier, but Maharaj's utterances have a unique resilience, giving them an exhilarating freshness every time. And one marvels all the more when one recalls that he has been talking like this, without any previous preparation, 2 sessions a day, every day of the week, including Sundays, for many years. And then, on top of this, Maharaj adds with a chuckle of amusement, "What do I talk about? Only one subject, the same subject. You and I, the world outside, and God." Generally, Maharaj does not bother to wait for his audience before opening any topic that comes to his mind. Sometimes his small loft room fills to capacity within 15 minutes or so. At other times, when he starts talking, one might say, thinking aloud, there are hardly 3 or 4 persons present. But it makes no difference to him. He may talk even to a single seeker, if he so chooses, and expound to him with zest the basics of his teaching, relating them to each other and placing them in true perspective. His mind is whole, a mind that goes beyond pragmatism. His thinking is total thinking. One morning, when I had paid my respects to Maharaj and sat down, I found that only 2 other persons were present. Maharaj suddenly said, "What is the difference between awareness and consciousness, if any?" When something like this happens, one does not really know whether he expects an answer or whether he is merely thinking aloud. One hesitates to answer for fear of breaking the flow of his thoughts. But then he might also say, "Why don't you answer? Have you been wasting my time, listening to the talks all these days?" This morning, however, he carried on without waiting for an answer. He observed that awareness is of the absolute and, therefore, beyond the 3 gunas, whereas consciousness is something fed by and limited by the food body. When the food body is destroyed, consciousness also disappears. Mind you, no one dies. The body, made of the 5 elements, mingles with the elements when it is lifeless, and consciousness, which is subject to the 3 gunas, becomes free of the gunas. Awareness is the primordial original state, prior to the concept of space-time, needing no cause, no support. It simply is. However, the moment the concept of consciousness arises on this original state of unicity, the sense I am arises, causing a condition of duality. Consciousness is with a form, a reflection of awareness against the surface of matter. One cannot think of consciousness apart from awareness. There cannot be a reflection of the sun without the sun. But there can be awareness without consciousness. In deep sleep, for instance, there is no consciousness. It is resting. But awareness is certainly there because, on waking, one is aware of having slept, but only on waking. Maharaj never allows us to forget that it is consciousness alone that is our constant companion, and that it is the continuous attention to one's stream of consciousness that takes one on to awareness, the basic existence, that which is life, love, joy. According to Maharaj, the very consciousness of being conscious is already a movement toward awareness. The mind, by its very nature, is outgoing, always tending to seek the source of things within the things themselves. When it is directed toward the source within, it is almost like the beginning of a new life. Awareness replaces consciousness. The I am, which is a thought in consciousness, ceases. In awareness, there is no thought. Awareness is the source of consciousness. Maharaj suggests that it is an excellent spiritual exercise to sit quietly and watch what comes to the surface of the mind. What we call thoughts are like ripples on the surface of water. Thoughts always lead to identification or condemnation. They are products of preconceived notions and stand in the way of real understanding. Just as water is serene when free of ripples, so is the mind serene when free of thoughts, when it is passive and fully receptive. In the mirror of your mind, says Maharaj, all kinds of pictures will appear, stay for a while, and disappear. Silently watch them come and go. Be alert, but not attracted or repelled. It is important not to be involved. This attitude of silent witnessing will gradually drive away all useless thoughts, like unwanted guests that are ignored. By being thus within yourself, that is, in the I amness, by watching the flow of mind without interfering or judging, as a dispassionate witness, the deep unknown will be encouraged to come to the surface of consciousness and release its unused energies to enable you to understand the mystery of the origin of life. Bondage of space and time.
Visitor. I remember reading somewhere that it is the combination of space and time which is the cause of one's bondage. I have since been wondering how possibly space and time could result in bondage.
Maharaj, let us be clear about what we are talking about. What do you mean by bondage? And bondage for whom? If you are satisfied with this world, which you consider as real, and the way it has been treating you, where is the bondage for you?
Visitor. Let me acknowledge that to me, the world seems real enough, but it is not a fact that I am satisfied with my role in it. I feel deeply convinced that there must be very much more to life than just going through it, as most of us do, without any definite aim, merely routinely. From this point of view, I think life itself is bondage.
Maharaj, when you use the word I, what exact image do you have about yourself? When you were a child, you considered yourself nothing other than a child and were happy enough to play with toys. Later, you were a young man, with strength enough in your arms to tackle a couple of elephants, and you thought you could face anything or anyone in this world. You are now in your middle age, a little mellower but nonetheless enjoying life and its pleasures, and you think you are a happy and successful man, blessed with a nice family. At present, you have an image about yourself that is quite different from the images you had earlier. Imagine yourself 10 years hence and further 20 years later. The image you will then have about yourself will be different from all the earlier ones. Which one of these images is the real you? Have you ever thought about it? Is there any particular identity that you can call your very own, and which has remained with you throughout, unchanged and unchangeable?
Visitor. Now that you mention it, I admit that when I use the word I have no particular idea about myself, and I agree that whatever idea I have had about myself has been changing over the years.
Maharaj, well, there is something which has remained unchanged all these years, while everything else has been changing. And that is the constant sense of presence, the sense that you exist. This sense or feeling, I am, has never changed. This is your constant image. You are sitting in front of me. You know it beyond doubt, without any need of confirmation from anyone else. Similarly, you know that you are, that you exist. Tell me, in the absence of what would you be unable to sense your existence?
Visitor. If I were asleep or unconscious, I would not know that I exist.
Maharaj, exactly. Let us proceed further. In the morning, the very first moment when you wake up and your consciousness just takes over, do you not feel your conscious presence, your existence I am, not as an individual person, but presence as such?
Visitor. Yes, that is right. I would say that my individual personality comes into existence when I see my body and other objects around.
Maharaj, when you say that you see an object, what really happens is that your senses have reacted to a stimulus from an outside source, which is external to your body apparatus. And what your senses have perceived and your mind has interpreted is nothing but an appearance in your consciousness. This appearance in consciousness is construed as an event, extended in space and duration. All manifestation depends on a combination of the two closely knit media called space and time. In other words, In the absence of the space-time combination, no manifestation could possibly arise in consciousness. Are you following me?
Visitor: Yes, I understand what you said, but where do I come in as an individual in this process?
Maharaj, this is exactly where the rub lies. All existence is a continuous process of objectifying. We only exist as one another's objects, and, as such, only in the consciousness that cognizes us. When objectivization ceases, as in deep sleep, the objective universe disappears. So long as one imagines oneself as a separate entity, a person, one cannot see the total picture of the impersonal reality. And the idea of a separate personality is due to the illusion of space and time, which by themselves have no independent existence, for they are only instruments, mere media to make manifestation cognizable. At any time, only one thought, feeling, or perception can be reflected in consciousness. But thoughts, feelings, and perceptions move on in succession, giving the illusion of duration. And personality comes into being simply because of memory, identifying the present with the past and projecting it into the future. Think of yourself as momentary, without a past or future. Then, where is the personality? Try this and find out for yourself. In memory and anticipation, that is, in the past and the future, there is a clear feeling that there is a mental state under observation, whereas in the actual moment, the feeling is primarily of being awake and present, here and now.
Visitor: I think I understand. I must sit quietly and try to absorb this wholly new way of thinking.
Maharaj, now do you see how space and time, which come along with consciousness and make manifestation perceivable, are the culprits? All you can truly say is, I am, meaning what is, is. The moment there is a thought of me as a separate personality, there is what is termed bondage. To realize this is the end of all seeking. When you apperceive that whatever you think yourself to be is only based on memory and anticipation, your search ends, and you stand aloof in full awareness of the false as false. How a Janani sees the world. A lady visitor, taking advantage of the fact that it was the last day of her visit to Bombay, sought Maharaj's permission to ask what she called a silly question. Maharaj, all thoughts, all desires, holy or unholy, come from the self. They all depend upon the desire to be happy, and, therefore, are based on the sense, I am. Their quality will depend on one's psyche, antakarana, and the degrees at which the three gunas prevail. Tamas produces restraint and perversions, Rajas produces energy and passions, and Sattva produces harmony and the urge to make others happy. Now, what is your question?
Visitor: all these days, which have unfortunately flown away all too quickly, whilst you were talking, and your words were emerging as if by themselves without any preparation behind them, I have been wondering how you look at the objects which your eyes see, including the persons who are sitting before you. As today is the last day of my present visit, I thought I would venture to ask this rather silly question.
Maharaj, what makes you think that I see you as objects at all? You assume that it is with a certain special significance that I see things, a significance which escapes you. But that is not really your question. Your question essentially seems to be, how are things perceived by a Janani who sees as seeing should be done? Please remember, objects are really the perceiving of them. Conversely, therefore, the perceiving of them is what the objects are. Try to understand. When an object is seen as an object, there would have to be a subject other than the object. As the Janani perceives, there is neither the subject that sees nor the object that is seen, only the seeing. In other words, The Jnani's perception is prior to any interpretation by the sensory faculties. Even if the normal process of objectification has taken place, the Jnani, in his perspective, has taken note of this fact and seen the false as false. The Jnani, in his undivided vision, has perceived that physically both the seer and the seen are objects, and that the functioning of consciousness itself merely produces effects in consciousness. Both the producing and the perceiving are done by consciousness, in consciousness. Try to understand this. In short, the Jnani's seeing is the whole seeing, or in-seeing, or intuitive seeing, seeing without any objective quality, and that is freedom from bondage. That is what I mean when I say, I see, but I do not see. And this is the silly answer to your silly question. The proof of truth. Can there be proof of truth? Maharaj sometimes puts this question as if to himself. Can truth be grasped intellectually? Apart from keen intellect, says Maharaj, the seeker must have faith to enable him to grasp the basic essentials of truth. And the faith should be of the kind that can accept the Guru's word as God's own truth. Faith is the first step, and no further progress is possible unless the first step is taken. There are simple-minded people who, though not gifted with keen intellect, have abundant faith. Maharaj gives them a mantra and asks them to chant it and meditate until their psyche is purified enough to receive knowledge. With the intellectuals, Maharaj has to deal differently. The intellectual understands what the various religions propagate, the ethical and moral codes they prescribe, and the metaphysical concepts they adumbrate. But he remains unenlightened. What he actually seeks is truth, the constant factor that is not subject to any change. And, what is more, he wants proof, but is not able to say what kind of proof would satisfy him. Proof as such would itself be something subject to space and time, and the intellectual is intelligent enough to know that. Truth, in order to be truth, must be timeless and spaceless. Maharaj says that any intelligent person must admit that I am, the sense of conscious presence, of being, is the only truth every sentient being knows of, and that is the only proof one can have. And yet, mere existence cannot be equated with truth, for the simple reason that existence itself is not timeless and spaceless, like reality. Maharaj in his talks throws abundant light on this stalemate. A blind man may say, "Prove to me that there are colors. Only then will I believe all your descriptions of the rainbow." Whenever such questions are put to Maharaj, he counters them by saying, "Prove to me that there is something like Bombay, or London, or New York. Everywhere, it is the same earth, air, water, fire, and sky." In other words, one cannot seek truth as an object, nor can truth be described. It can only be suggested or indicated, but not expressed in words, because truth cannot be conceived. Anything conceived will be an object, and truth is not an object. As Maharaj puts it, you cannot shop for truth as something which is authoritatively certified and stamped as truth. Any attempt to find the proof of truth would involve a division of the mind into subject and object, and then the answer could not be the truth, because there is nothing objective about truth, which essentially is pure subjectivity. The whole process, says Maharaj, is like a dog chasing its own tail. In seeking a solution to this riddle, one must analyze the problem itself. Who is it that wants the proof of truth or reality? Do we clearly understand what we are? All existence is objective. We all exist as objects only, as mere appearances in the consciousness that cognizes us. Is there really any proof that we, who seek proof of reality, ourselves exist, other than as objects of cognition in someone else's mind? When we seek the proof of truth, What we are trying to do is equivalent to a shadow seeking proof of the substance. Maharaj, therefore, urges us to see the false as false, and then there will be no more looking for truth. Have you understood what I mean? He asks. Do you not intuitively feel what the position is? That which is sought is the seeker himself. Can an eye see itself? Please understand, he says, timeless, spaceless, not cognizable sensorially is what we are. Temporal, finite, and sensorially cognizable is what we appear to be as separate objects. Consider what you were before you acquired the physical form. Did you need any proof about anything then? The question of proof arises only in relative existence, and any proof provided within the parameters of relative existence can only be an untruth. You are Rama, I am Rama. Different types of people come to Maharaj with different motives. Usually he asks a new visitor to tell him something about himself, his family background, his business or profession, the length of time he has been interested in spiritual quest, the kind of practices he has done, and the specific reasons for his visit. Maharaj's intention, obviously, is to find out in what way and by what approach he could help each visitor personally, and, at the same time, ensure that the dialogue would also enlighten the other visitors. Most of the visitors state briefly the required facts about themselves, and many of them say they had read his book, I Am That, and had ever since desired to sit at his feet and listen to him. In such cases, Maharaj would smile and nod his head. If anyone wanted to ask specific questions, Maharaj would ask him to sit closer so that the dialogue could be carried on more easily. Those who had no questions would be expected to sit further back. Once, when the session was about to begin, two middle-aged gentlemen walked in, paid their respects to Maharaj, and sat down. One of them told Maharaj that he was a senior government official and that he had no particular interest in spiritual matters. He had come there only to introduce his brother, who was deeply interested. After introducing his companion as his brother, the gentleman left. The brother then took over and told Maharaj that he had had a guru for many years, but that the guru had passed away. He said he had received from the guru a mantra and was told that its repetition, as often as possible, was the best sadhana. And he was following these instructions. He explained that he had now reached a stage where he believed that everything was Rama, and Rama was in everything. Through this sadhana, he had attained a peace and joy not possible to describe in words. All this was stated in a manner as if he were making a great revelation for the benefit of the audience before him, including Maharaj himself. After his narration, he looked around to see what effect it had created on the listeners. Then, with complacent self-satisfaction, he sat, eyes closed and smiling to himself. Maharaj, serene and silent to all appearances, but with a sparkling glint in his eyes that the regular visitors knew well, asked the man politely if he could be of help to him in any way. In response, the gentleman, waving his right arm in a gesture of resignation, said that he did not want anything from anybody, and that he had come to see Maharaj only because several people had pressed him to attend at least one session of his talks. And here he was. Maharaj, is there any specific purpose for your visit? What do you hope to achieve from it, if anything?
Visitor, when I sit in meditation, I often get lovely visions of my beloved Lord Rama, and I am engulfed in bliss.
Maharaj, and when you are not in meditation?
Visitor, I think of the Lord and see Him in everyone and everything.
Maharaj listened to the answer with an expression of amusement, and again there was the familiar glint in his eyes. The regular visitors knew what was coming, as the glint often preceded Maharaj's verbal sallies aimed at deflating hollow presumptions and destroying illusions. Maharaj, And what do you mean by Rama?
Visitor: I don't understand the question. Rama is God.
Maharaj, when you see Rama in me, Rama in a dog, and Rama in a flower, what exactly do you mean by Rama? And how exactly do you see Rama? In his traditional pose, with a string bow on his shoulder and arrows in his quiver?
Visitor: rather confused. Yes, I think so.
Maharaj, and the peace and joy that you feel when you sit in meditation and get visions of Rama, would it be something like the peace and joy one would feel when, after a long and tiring walk in the scorching sun, one is able to rest under the shade of a spreading tree, enjoy the breeze, and drink some cool water?
Visitor: you cannot really compare the two, because one is physical, and the other is, I would say, mental or psychic.
Maharaj, in any case, would your Rama enable you to have a clear understanding of your true nature?
Visitor: what is the use of such a discussion? Rama is God, and I am only a poor human who has surrendered himself to him.
Maharaj, surrender is a very good and effective practice by itself, but we must very clearly understand what surrender really means, though that is a separate subject by itself. Are you aware that Rama, though a prince by birth, was only an ordinary human being like you, who did not become a god until he was duly initiated and instructed in knowledge by the sage Vasishtha? And what was the teaching that Vasishtha imparted to the young prince? Was it not Atmajnana, the knowledge of the self, the knowledge of one's true nature? I would suggest that you throw away all the illusory concepts you have collected over the years and begin with your own self. Think along these lines. What is my true nature? What is the capital I am born with, and which has remained faithful and unchanged from the moment I had the knowledge that I exist? How did I acquire this body construct along with the prana, the vital force, and the consciousness that gives me the sense of presence? How long will all this last? What was I before this body came into being? And what will I be after this body disintegrates? Who was really born and who will die? What am I? It was such knowledge that turned Rama from a human being into a god. By this time, the visitor realized that something was very much wanting in the way he had practiced sadhana without ever giving serious thought to the ultimate aim of his spiritual quest. He gave up his pretentious pose of being an enlightened person and very humbly requested Maharaj for permission to visit him again during the few days he would be staying in Bombay. Maharaj lovingly told him that the sincerity and keenness of his desire to visit him were all the permission that was necessary. Images in imagination. Whatever the subject of discussion at a session, Maharaj ensures that the catechism follows the correct line of argument. Whenever someone puts forth an irrelevant question, Maharaj firmly but gently rules it out and brings the discussion back to the original theme. Occasionally, however, Maharaj has to leave the room briefly on some errand. During one such short interval, someone began talking about a politician who had prominently figured in the press that morning. The speaker claimed to know the individual personally and described him as a conceited bully. Another person immediately contradicted the speaker, saying that the man in question was a perfect gentleman, and it was a calumny to speak ill of him. An argument between the two was about to start when Maharaj returned, and they quickly fell silent. Maharaj, sensing the sudden quiet, asked what was going on. When told about the contradictory opinions, he was vastly amused. He sat still for a few moments and then began to speak. "Why this difference in the two opinions?" he asked. "Because the opinion forming was done through an individual viewpoint and not through integral perception. both the images of the same person arose in the imagination of the viewers. Both were entirely their own mental creations and basically unrelated to the object, that is, the person whose images these were supposed to be. Maharaj explained that the creation of such images is due to the functioning of dualistic discrimination, them and the other. This, he said, is indeed what may be called the original sin. This duality, them and the other, is bondage. And if there is anything like liberation, in essence there is no individual that is bound, it is indeed liberation from this concept of me and the other. What is necessary, said Maharaj, is to cease making snap conceptual judgments of things as objects and to turn one's attention back to the subjective source. He asked us to reverse our attention, to go back to the infant state, even to think of what we were before this body-mind complex was born. By doing so, we would stop conceptualizing about others all the time and avoid becoming entangled in mere mental images. At this stage, a visitor said, "Yes, Maharaj, I can clearly see what you mean. But how can one get away from this continuous conceptualizing, which seems to be the very warp and woof of one's conscious life?" Maharaj fixed his gaze on the questioner, and, almost before the Marathi translation of his question was completed, remarked, "Rubbish. You could not have understood my point at all. If you had, your question could not arise." He then explained the process of objectification. Whatever your senses perceive and your mind interprets is an appearance in consciousness, extended in space-time, and objectivized in a world that the cognizing subject, i.e., you, considers as separate from himself. And this is where the whole error lies. In this process, perception is not total. What is necessary is whole seeing, not seeing with the individual mind, which is a divided mind, but seeing from within, seeing from the source, not from manifestation as a phenomenon, but from the source of all seeing. Then, and only then, will there be total perception and correct seeing and apprehending. Maharaj concluded by saying, "What I have said is vitally important and needs manana, deep pondering and meditating over it, not mere verbal discussion."